Good afternoon to the first screening of the day, Xenogenesis. I'm very happy that we can show you a new film by the Otolith Group, the collaborative platform that was founded by Angelica Sagar and Kodwo Eshun. The film that you will be watching is called Infinity Minus Infinity. The title of this program is Xenogenesis, and it's named after Octavia Butler's trilogy. Also, it refers to the processes of outside becoming. It's a theory that's been continually present in their work. But before we start the film, we have the honor that Edward Akintola Hubbard will introduce the film and some of the theory, some of the ideas that are discussed by the Otolith Group. Edward is an assistant professor of arts and society at Utrecht University. He's an award-winning journalist, and he does multi-sided research, often of cinema and visual culture, contemporary art and folklore, with a particular focus on the Afro-Atlantic, specifically the Caribbean, Brazil, and Cape Verde. So I think without further ado, it's time for Akin to take the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Edward Akintola Hubbard, and this is a very strange way to introduce a festival, thanks to COVID, but I'm happy to join you, and I hope I can say a few things that can sort of illuminate this film you're about to experience and give you some sense of maybe some kind of roadmap to understand what you're seeing. It's a rather abstract piece, and it's, as the sort of images and sounds swirl around you, I just want you to probably think about a few concepts that might be helpful for you to get you through this film. It's 50 minutes long, and I think it's going to take us in and out of a really, I think, interesting experience, with bodies and with time and with space. So I think I would love to start by introducing everyone to what I consider to be the core of this film, which is I think it's beckoning to something that has been quite a bit of a discussion in the past 10 or so years in social theory, but it's a more or less expanded notion of capitalism. And I think this is also in keeping with the theme of this year's IMPAKT Festival. But this expanded notion of capitalism, I think two words I think should sort of be keywords for everyone watching this film is the Anthropocene as well as the Capitalocene. What do these things mean? Well, the Anthropocene refers to the current stage of history, including geological history that we're inhabiting right now, where it's the Anthropocene, as the term anthropo suggests, is that it suggests that man and man's activities have sort of dominated nature and dominated the entire natural world to the point where, of course, things like environmental destruction is a part of daily reality. The term capitalocene, which I think is somewhat connected to this, is also the idea that capital and capitalism has dominated the last few centuries of human life on Earth, and this, of course, has meant that we have to consider what capitalism has done to us as human beings, but also what capitalism has done to the world we live in, what it has done to everything around us, including the air, including flora, fauna, the earth, and space. So with the notion of capitalocene, I think also there are some other concepts that you might want to think about or put in the back of your heads as you watch this. As I watched this film, I thought of the work of the feminist political philosopher Wendy Brown. She talks a lot about the Homo Economicus, which is a term connected to the two terms I just introduced. The term that suggests that man itself, in man's evolution, we have become, in a sense, dominated by neoliberal economic forces. It means that all of human life can now be seen as somewhat happening and occurring under the aegis of capital and capitalism. Capitalism and money and wealth dominate every aspect of human life. And that is why we have to refer to ourselves now as a kind of Homo Economicus. Now, what does this all mean? And what does this all imply about us? Well, one of the theorists I think who would be very helpful for this is someone I'm currently engaging with, Achille Mbembe, who is a Cameroonian philosopher and writing mostly in French, but his latest book, or sorry, I should say, one of his most recent texts, The Critique of Black Reason, is, I think, a very, very instrumental text in understanding this transition we've been making into Homo Economicus. And Mbembe's argument is that capitalism, we have to see it as a kind of expanded process. We are normally accustomed to seeing capitalism as a kind of it's about wealth accumulation, it's about class, it's about money, it's about commodities. But in his theory of capitalism, he's saying we need to think of capitalism as much more expanded. And also we need to think of capitalism as part and parcel of the entire structure of human relations that we're living under, and particularly the relationship of races on the earth. And that means we have to think about and consider capitalism in terms of racial capitalism. But I also want to urge everyone to think of this expanded notion of capitalism to include matter as well, and nature, as I said. Now, one of the ideas from Mbembe, I think, that helped me to kind of penetrate this film is the idea of animism, which is a term we take from anthropology. Now, animism refers to the imbuing of magical powers, the imbuing of inanimate objects, matter, all things around us with magical powers. And if I could quote him, he says, this is Mbembe, he says, "We are living in an age when capitalism has become somewhat of a religion, a religion of objects, a religion that believes in objects having become animated, having a soul of which we partake through the operations of consumption, which means capitalism has become a form of animism." Now, this is what I mean, is that capitalism is expanded. So we have to think about capitalism, a capitalism which includes the world of commodities and wealth accumulation, but a capitalism of bodies, a capitalism of bodies that are gendered and racialized. We have to think of capitalism as a capitalism of places and spaces. We have to think of capitalism, of a capitalism of time and temporality, capitalism of memory, and I think most importantly for this film, a capitalism of matter and materiality. Now, what is a capitalism of matter and materiality? It's a capitalism that takes nature itself as being monetizable, as being something that can be colonized by industrial forces, but also industrial forces working in tandem with the same forces that racialize bodies. So let's think of this kind of expanded capitalism as we watch this film. Now, one of the other things we need to think carefully about, and I think is sort of like if you've read the written introduction to this film, is the Windrush scandal. Now, for people who are not familiar with this, the Windrush scandal happened back in 2018. It's about 2 years ago. And this was a scandal that led to the resignation of the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, Amber Rudd. I think she'll be referenced in this film. But this was because of Theresa May's notorious hostile environment policy. Now, just to be very, very clear about the hostile environment, Theresa May and the Tory government felt that the best way to deal with illegal immigration in the UK was to create essentially a hostile environment, an environment in which it would be very difficult for people who are living illegally in the United Kingdom to actually survive and have lives there. And so this new sort of practice of zoning is what I call it, where national borders become militarized and defended, is the basis for this hostile environment. In other words, let's make life as difficult as possible for people who are not legally living in the United Kingdom. And for all intents and purposes, it means let's make life as difficult as possible for people who are people of color. So the Windrush scandal resulted in the deportation of many, many people, people who were illegal, but most importantly, people who were actually not technically illegal in the United Kingdom, because Windrush, I should say, was the name of a ship that brought West Indians in 1948, people from the Caribbean, to work in United Kingdom to sort of rebuild Britain's destroyed infrastructure after World War II. Now, these people, many of them did not actually get formal citizenship in Britain. And it was up until 2018, under this new hostile environment policy, that some of these people actually became, got targeted by law enforcement. Many were detained. Many were actually deported back to the Caribbean. And so this led to this massive, outcry, public outcry, and essentially the Home Secretary had to resign because she was responsible for this actual move by the government. Now, the Windrush scandal, of course, opens up this question of what exactly is a hostile environment, and why is one needed for the nation, for the maintenance of the security of a nation state. Why is it that people of color have to be the targets of this kind of hostile environment, this kind of hostile violence itself? And I think one of the things that is important about this film is, what does it mean when you say hostile environment? When we're saying hostile environment, we're not just speaking about a social environment, but I want us to also think about hostility in terms of hostility brought within and expanded within an environment that includes men, includes objects, and it also includes nature. This is the same colonial government or the government that was responsible for colonization of people and bodies, but a colonization of places by way of capitalism. And the Caribbean, of course, was one of these places where the British government and many European governments felt that this was their territory, and of course this led to the whole-scale colonization of many of the islands. But of course, these islands, up to this day, suffer the consequences of not just the incarceration of people and the enslavement of people, but of course the exploitation of the environment. Many of the people who were deported in the Windrush scandal were actually poor people from rural parts of the Caribbean, like where I'm from, Jamaica. Many of them came from farming communities. So when the Windrush scandal happened, many of these people were deported back to a Caribbean whose environment itself is also depleted. And many of them have to return to farming jobs that don't exist anymore. Because of policies by the IMF and the World Bank, it's become very difficult to farm, and local farming itself is a disappearing practice in the Caribbean. So I want us to go back to all of these questions I raised, the whole notion of militarization of borders, the capitalism of bodies, the othering of bodies, the gendering and racializing of these bodies, the capitalism of places and spaces, the way that colonialism means the occupation of land, but also the exploitation and degradation of land. I also want us to think about time and temporality, how it is that places outside of Europe are seen as being behind the rest of Europe. I want you to think about memory and how governments can erase their own sort of complicity in colonialism and essentially erase a whole memory of trauma that people of color have faced. And finally, I want you to think about matter. Matter itself as a thing that can be exploited, a thing that can be colonized, and matter meaning also plants, animals, farmland, water, all of these things being something that can be monetized, something that can actually be exploited and taken over by colonial forces. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce this film, and I would like you all to sort of just let this film wash over you and try to use these concepts to understand and interpret some of these interesting codes that this film throws at us. I will hand it now over to Inez.